friends, and welcome back to Firestarters. Let's start the show. Once again, welcome back to Firestarters, the channel dedicated to telling you tales of the greatest, the men and women who simply did the will of God in the present moment, the saints. Now, usually in these videos, I'm telling you guys the life of one saint. This is a very special video because I get to tell you about 3. Technically, only 2 of them are canonized saints, but the third one, her cause for canonization opened in the year 2008. So it's only a matter of time. This is the incredible story of Lucia dos Santos and her 2 younger cousins Francisco and Jacinta Marto, most commonly known as the Children of Fatima. Francisco and Jacinta, the youngest of the 3 children, are the youngest non-martyr saints to be canonized in church history. And the oldest of the 3 children, Lucia dos Santos, is the most recent person to have died that we have talked about on Firestarters. She outlived her 2 cousins, Francisco and Jacinta, by almost 9 decades, and she died in 2005, so 18 years ago. Y'all, I am so dadgum pumped! The story of Fatima is so incredible and such an important message for the modern times. So without further ado, let's get to today's video. The story of Fatima that I will be telling you is based entirely off of this book right here, titled Fatima in Lucia's Own Words. And as you can see, it's got a picture of Sister Lucia later in her life as a Carmelite nun. This book contains the actual words, the memoirs of Sister Lucia translated from Portuguese into English, which she wrote to Dom José Alves Correa da Silva, who was the bishop of the Diocese of Leira, to which Fatima belongs. And she wrote these memoirs under orders of the bishop in between the years of 1935 to 1941. She completed her first memoir on Christmas Day of 1935, simply titled Jacinta. So let's go over a basic background of the 3 children. I am now about to attempt to pronounce a multitude of Portuguese names, so I really hope I don't butcher them. Lucia Arobara dos Santos was born on March 22nd, 1907, the youngest of 6 children, to her father Antonio dos Santos and her mother Maria Rosa. Her cousin Francisco Marto was born on the 11th of June 1908, and his youngest sister Jacinta was born on the 11th of March 1910. They were the youngest children of their parents Manuel and Olimpia Marto, and they were all born in the small village of Aljustrel in western central Portugal, which is about 110 miles north of Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. So now let's take an exciting journey over to Portugal. So we go over to Spain, and we zoom in on Spain and work our way west to Portugal, and we go south to the capital of Lisbon, and we work our way north. We get to Leira, and then work our way a little bit south, and here is Aljustrel. This whole area surrounding this little village is the town of Fatima. Lucia's family were modest farmers living in the village of Fatima, and the girls of the family were all seamstresses, skilled in things like sewing and knitting, and her family was also very devout in their Catholic faith. Lucia recalls that the first thing she learned was the Hail Mary. She also described her family as the leading lights among the young people, as they were always attending parish festivals, dances, weddings, you name it. And they were particularly fond of the feast of St. Anthony. Portuguese are generally pretty fond of that guy. Lucia also mentioned that the dances and the festivities would last all night, like into the next morning. So you're basically telling me that they were party animals. What is love? They celebrated life, they celebrated their faith, they celebrated the saints. Lucia also recalls that her first communion was a great turning point in her life. She mentioned that as she was preparing herself to receive Holy Communion, her mother instructed her in her prayers and told her specifically, above all, ask the Lord to make you a saint. She tells this incredible story that while she was in the church the day before her Holy Communion, she was kneeling down praying, and there was a statue in front of her of Our Lady of the Rosary. And as she was praying, she looked up and noticed the statue smiling at her. Sister Lucia said in her memoirs that after she received Holy Communion for the first time, quote, "I lost the taste and attraction for the things of the world." Now, going back to some details about her home life, Lucia described her household as usually very busy, as people were constantly visiting, learning things like dressmaking, sewing, knitting, and there were always sick patients in the house, as Lucia's mother was a nurse. And as she was the youngest of her siblings, Lucia was more or less the household favorite, always getting hugs and kisses and TLC from the rest of her family. And if any of you have a big family, you probably know what I'm talking about. Now, mentioning Lucia as the family favorite is a very important detail, which we will get to in just a little bit. When she was 7 years old, Lucia's mother deemed it necessary for her to begin tending after the family's sheep. And this was around the year 1915. So that's basically Lucia's childhood background. Now, in order to continue her story, we're going to start talking about her two cousins, Francisco and Jacinta Marto. Now, interestingly, Lucia said in her memoirs that before the happenings of 1917, which we'll get to in a little bit, apart from the ties of relationship that united us, no other particular affection led me to prefer the companionship of Jacinta and Francisco to that of any other child. She also mentioned that Francisco and Jacinta had a special liking for her, as they always came in search of her when they wanted to play, and they didn't really like the company of any of the other children. Now, regarding Jacinta, and this is kind of funny, a lot of us can relate to this. Lucia sometimes found Jacinta's company to be quite disagreeable because of how oversensitive she was. You guys ever, when we were all kids and there was this one kid who always had to have things his or her way, wanted the games to be played by his rules or her rules and would not be satisfied if it was done any other way. That was Jacinta Marto. Like the slightest quarrel would send her crying off in a corner somewhere, or she refused to play with the other kids because she didn't get to choose the game. I think we all knew a kid like that. I'm just saying that the Marto family probably had some rough nights whenever they played Monopoly. Ooh, honey, you just landed on my boardwalk space, so now you owe me 376,000 escudos. Now, rest assured, this is the only time I will be dogging on Jacinta Marto, as she is probably holier than I will ever be. Lucia detailed that Jacinta's heart was well disposed and that God had endowed her with a sweet and gentle character which made her at once lovable and attractive. At the age of 7, Jacinta expressed a profound love and adoration for Christ on the cross. Lucia detailed that Jacinta would break down crying when viewing a crucifix. She would often ask Lucia to tell the story of Jesus' passion and death, and every single time she told it to her, she would just break down crying, and she would say things like, "Our poor dear Lord, I'll never sin again. I don't want our Lord to suffer anymore." Now, Jacinta's older brother, Francisco, was a little bit different. Lucia described Francisco as a boy of few words, and she explained in her memoirs, he had an easy manner and was always friendly and smiling, playing with all the children without distinction. He did not rebuke anybody. All he did was go aside whenever he saw anything that was not as it should be. Like in the middle of playing a game with his friends, he would just stop sometimes. And when asked why, he would say, "'Cause you're not good at this game," or "I don't want to play anymore." I must say I do appreciate an honest chap. Lucia also described Francisco as a lover of prayer and solitude. Often Lucia and Jacinta would find him hidden behind a wall or a clump of blackberry bushes, and he would explain that he was just praying or thinking. Francisco was also quite fond of birds, and oftentimes when they would go outside to play, Francisco would bring parts of his lunch to hand out to the birds, and they would come flying and flocking around him to get a share of his lunch. Hey everyone! The food boy's back! Come on! There's also a story of Francisco encountering another boy who caught a bird in his hand, and when Francisco saw that he had the bird, he begged him to let the bird go and offered him 2 coins if he did, and the boy agreed. And so Francisco ran all the way home, grabbed the coins, and came back, and then the boy let the bird go. You could say he was a mini version of St. Francis of Assisi. I mean, his name is Francisco, so coincidence? I think not. Francisco and his youngest sister Jacinta were the youngest children of Manuel and Olympia Marto, who, like Lucia's family, lived a modest farm life in the village of Aljustrel in Fatima. Alright, so we've talked about the general background of Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, who would later be known as the three children of Fatima. And so now we're going to get into the apparitions of Fatima, which started in the year 1915 with Lucia, when she became the shepherdess of her family, and she would have been about 7 or 8 years old. One day in the year 1915, Lucia was out tending sheep with her two friends Teresa Matias, Maria Justino, and her sister Maria Rosa, and they set out to this hill known as the Cabezo, and they went up the northern slope up to the very top. And at the top of this slope, they're looking down, and they see a vast expanse of trees stretching down toward the valley below. After eating their lunch at about noon, Lucia invited her friends to pray the rosary with her, to which they eagerly agreed, and so they began praying the rosary. Now, while they were praying, they noticed something a little weird. In the air above the tree line, there suddenly appeared a white, human-like figure, just kind of suspended, floating. Lucia described it in her memoirs, saying it looked like a statue made of snow, rendered almost transparent by the rays of the sun. And the girls, initially upon noticing it, became frightened, but continued praying. And after they finished praying, the figure disappeared. Now, as the girls began walking home, Lucia, for whatever reason, made a resolve not to tell anyone about this strange apparition that they witnessed. But when her friends got home, they told their families about it, and this is a small Portuguese village where everybody knows each other, and so word spread around like wildfire. And Lucia's mother quickly found out, and wanting to get to the bottom of it, she asked Lucia, like, what were you guys doing? What did you see up on the Cabezo? And Lucia responded, I don't know, it looked like a person wrapped in a sheet. And Lucia's mother was a hardworking, kind of no-nonsense woman, and so she just dismissed it as childish nonsense. Now, this same apparition would happen on 2 more occasions with the same kind of pattern. The girls going out to shepherd the sheep, having lunch on the Cabezo, praying the rosary, and seeing this strange white human figure suspended in the air. And of course, word spread around. Lucia's mother got increasingly frustrated, thinking that Lucia was lying, and her sisters began making fun of her. And this was a big change in Lucia's life, because if you remember what I said earlier in the video, that Lucia was kind of the family favorite, always being pampered and loved, and now she was being singled out and made fun of, which was quite a change in her life. Now, it was after these apparitions that Lucia was no longer partnered to shepherd with her two friends, Teresa Matias or Maria Justino, or her sister, Maria Rosa, but instead she was partnered with her two cousins, Francisco and Jacinta. In the spring of 1916, the 3 children went up to the Cabezo, the same hill that Lucia went up with the other girls when they saw the apparition. But this time they traveled up the eastern slope of the hill, and it was about mid-morning when it started to rain, and Lucia described in her memoirs that it was a very fine rain, almost like mist. And they took shelter from the rain under this overhanging boulder in the middle of an olive grove, and they would spend the rest of their day in this area. They ate their lunch, and like good little Catholic children, they prayed the rosary. Except Lucia hilariously details that the way the children initially prayed the rosary was just simply by passing over each bead and going, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Our Father, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary. It's a very efficient process, don't get me wrong. After the children finished their speedy version of the rosary, suddenly it stopped raining and the clouds parted and the sun began to shine down, and it was beautiful. And so the children took advantage of this and began enjoying basking in the sunlight and playing games with each other. Now, after the children had played games and enjoyed this beautiful, calm, and sunny weather for a little bit, suddenly a strong wind shook the trees of the Cabezo that they were playing on. And this took the children totally by surprise, especially since the weather was so calm just a moment before. Suddenly, coming toward them, above the olive trees, was the mysterious white figure that Lucia had seen with her friends the previous year. And Jacinta and Francisco had never seen it before, and Lucia had never told them about it. As the figure drew closer and closer to them, Lucia described it as a light brighter than any crystal in the form of a transparent young man. And as the figure drew even closer to them, they could distinguish his features more and more clearly, and determined him to be a young man of about 14 or 15 years old. They became awestruck and amazed as the figure began speaking to them. He told the children, "Do not be afraid. I am the angel of peace. Pray with me." He then bowed down until his forehead touched the ground and told the children to repeat these words 3 times. "My God, I believe, I adore, I hope, and I love you. I ask pardon of you for those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love you." He then rose and said, "Pray thus. The hearts of Jesus and Mary are attentive to the voice of your supplications." After he said these words, the angel departed from them. Lucia described that after this apparition, the children felt enveloped by a spiritual atmosphere that was so intense and intimate, they didn't speak to each other, like they were scarcely aware of their own existence. I mean, what would you do if a sparkling, transparent, floating teenage boy told you he was an angel? Now, a couple of months go by, and at the height of summer, the children were playing outside in that same area on the Cabezo when the angel appeared to them again and said, "What are you doing? Pray very much. The hearts of Jesus and Mary have designs of mercy on you. Offer prayers and sacrifices most constantly to the Most High." Lucia then asked the angel, "How are we to make sacrifices?" And the angel replied, "Make everything you do a sacrifice, and offer it to God as an act of reparation for the sins by which He is offended, and in supplication for the conversion of sinners. You will thus draw down peace upon your country. I am its angel guardian, the angel of Portugal. Above all, accept and bear with submission the suffering which the Lord will send you." Lucia said that these words of the angel became ingrained in their minds. She described it saying they were like a light which made us understand who God is, how He loves us and desires to be loved, the value of sacrifice, how pleasing it is to Him, and how, on account of it, He grants the grace of conversion to sinners. Now, when I was first reading about these words of the angel to the children, I was kind of a little bit confused. He's reprimanding the children for playing. That's what kids do. They play outside. Children playing outside? Now, it's not the angel being angry at the children for just being children or just for playing. He was letting the children know how important the mission is that they are about to be entrusted. And we're going to get to that in just a second. It's kind of like when parents are at church with their children and they have to reprimand their kids because they're misbehaving during church. And so you remind them, we are at Mass right now, we're at church, now is the time for reverence, not for playing. Hey, now is not the time to smash your goldfish crackers into the church carpet. Now is the time to pay attention to Jesus. A couple of months go by, and now it's toward the end of September or October, and the children go up to the Cabezo and they pray their rosary. And this time they're actually praying the full prayers. They're not doing the Hail Mary thing on the beads. They pray the rosary, and they also pray the prayer that the angel who had appeared to them taught them. And while they were praying, the angel appeared to them for a 3rd time, this time holding a chalice in his hand with a host above it, and drops of blood were falling from the host into the chalice. The angel then left the chalice and the host floating in the air while he bowed down to the ground and repeated this prayer 3 times. Most Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I adore you profoundly, and I offer you the most precious body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, present in all the tabernacles of the world, in reparation for the outrages, sacrileges, and indifference with which He Himself is offended, and through the infinite merits of His most sacred heart and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I beg of you the conversion of poor sinners. The angel then rose and took the chalice and host back into his hands, and gave the host to Lucia, Jacinta, and Francisco to eat, and the chalice to drink. And while doing so, he said, "Take and drink the body and blood of Jesus Christ, horribly outraged by ungrateful men. Repair their crimes and console your God." The angel then bowed down again and repeated the same prayer 3 more times, with the children saying it along with him. And afterwards, the angel disappeared. The children were greatly influenced by this supernatural experience, and even after the angel disappeared, the children continued to prostrate themselves, repeating the angel's prayer. And Lucia describes that after this third apparition of the angel, that they were in such an intense supernatural trance that they went about the rest of their day guided by some force, or that their bodily functions were out of their control, and that they felt physically exhausted afterwards. Now, if you're thinking this is all just a little bit crazy, we're just getting started. Fast forward to the following year on the 13th of May 1917, when the 3 children, Lucia, Jacinta, and Francisco, are tending their sheep just as they have before up on that hill, the Cabezo, when suddenly they see a flash of lightning. Now, anticipating that a storm was overhead, they decided to head home. They began hurrying the sheep down the slope toward the road to head back home, and when they were about halfway down the slope, they see another flash of lightning. Continue down just a couple more steps when suddenly they see, standing on a small holm oak tree, a lady dressed all in white. In her memoirs, Sister Lucia describes that she was more brilliant than the sun and radiated a light more clear and intense than a crystal glass filled with sparkling water when the sun's rays shine through it. The children stopped, amazed, and Lucia described that they were so close to the apparition, so close to this shining woman, that they were bathed in the light that was radiating from her. This beautiful, radiant woman then began to speak to the children. So with that, we will end this video, which is only part 1 of the amazing story of Fatima. Please stay tuned as we will continue this story in part 2. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe. Please pray for me as I will be praying for you. And again, stay tuned. Part 2 will be coming out soon. So yeah. Okay, bye. When the 3 children... Pick number 3, my lord!